One seemingly ordinary morning, dozens of fully equipped Special Forces officers stormed a house. After a powerful bang of a sledgehammer, they easily stormed inside. The woman was knocked to the floor. The man, desperate, leaned against the wall, repeatedly shouting that they must be wrong. His 2 children were still upstairs. The police's target was the boy huddled in bed. Lisa, emerging from the bathroom, was utterly terrified by the sight. Immediately afterward, the officer handed a search warrant to the father, Eddie, who then entered the boy's room. Jamie was terrified as he heard the accusation. Eddie stood outside the door shouting, "How could my son be a murderer?" The officer immediately warned him not to obstruct the officers, otherwise he too would be arrested. Then, the police read the entire wanted poster to Jamie. They were arresting him on suspicion of murder. Eddie believed his son was innocent, but he knew now wasn't the time to argue about right and wrong. So he told his son to cooperate with the police. At this point, the officer noticed Jamie was so scared he'd wet his pants. The police then put him in the car. Before they left, Eddie repeatedly warned Jamie not to say anything. A 13-year-old boy like him had been arrested for murder. Jamie said he hadn't done anything, but the officer, Luke, reminded him that this wasn't the time to speak. They then went to the police station together. Jamie was taken to a separate cell. From that moment on, his official detention period began, lasting 24 hours. Afterwards, Luke contacted Jamie's parents and informed them that the police could provide him with a free lawyer. Luke explained that the assigned lawyer wasn't affiliated with the police. The lawyer's job was to protect Jamie's legal rights. Luke then said Jamie wanted his father to accompany him as his guardian. Because he was underage, he had the right to choose an adult to be his guardian during the interrogation. Eddie immediately agreed without hesitation. But then, Luke reminded him that if his son had previously revealed anything related to the case, he was not allowed to be his guardian. He insisted that his son had never said anything. He was certain his son was innocent. Then, Luke left the room. The family finally had a moment of peace. Eddie told his wife not to tell anyone about this. His wife was just calling a friend to look after the house. After all, the front door had been broken down. Eddie told his wife to remember to ask her friend to take some extra photos as evidence so they could claim compensation from the police later. At this point, Lisa asked what would happen. Her mother reassured her that it must be a mistake. Just then, lawyer Barlow, appointed by the police, arrived and inquired about the situation from Eddie and Manda. The two immediately complained about the police's overly rough arrest. Barlow said that only in cases involving violent fatalities would suspects be arrested in this manner. This indicated that the case was not simple. However, he reassured them that it was currently unclear what evidence the police possessed. Perhaps there would be a favorable turn of events for Jamie. Afterward, the police proceeded to collect data from Jamie. The lawyer entered the medical room and introduced himself. They took his photo and fingerprints. Then, a police officer casually told Jamie that they needed his phone password to unlock it for investigation, but Barlow told Jamie that he didn't need to give it to them. Luckily, Barlow's timely warning could have led Jamie into a carefully prepared trap. After completing the sampling procedure, Barlow, Eddie, and Jamie moved to the interrogation room. He needed to understand Jamie's situation and instruct them on what to keep in mind during the upcoming interrogation, but Barlow didn't get straight to the point. Instead, he asked Jamie what subject he liked best. Jamie answered without hesitation. He said he really liked history. He even named his favorite historical figures and events. Barlow realized Jamie was a smart child. At this point, Eddie said his son couldn't be the culprit. Barlow replied that no matter what, guilty or not guilty, he would still stand by Jamie. His responsibility was to protect the defendant's rights as much as possible. Then, Barlow instructed Jamie that no matter what the police asked, he should answer, "I'm not comfortable saying." Jamie asked, "Should I answer all questions the same way?" Barlow replied that he couldn't use the same answer for every situation. Only questions related to last night's incident should be answered that way. To check if Jamie understood the difference, Barlow gave simple examples. After giving his instructions, Barlow said he would go check if the interrogators were ready. Then he stood up and left the room. At that moment, Eddie chased after Barlow, anxiously saying that he really didn't know what to do. After all, he had never been to a police station before and had never experienced anything like this. Barlow reminded Eddie not to answer any questions for his son. Barlow completely understood a father's feelings, but they had to gradually accept it. Then, Eddie returned to the room. He had a question he wanted to ask but didn't dare voice. He asked his son if he was okay. When Jamie heard his son say he was okay, he went straight to the point. "Whatever happened, whether you did it or not, tell me the truth. Did you kill anyone? No? Really?" Hearing his son's answer, the father's heart finally felt a little lighter. Fortunately, it was all just a nightmare. Afterwards, Jamie was taken to the interrogation room with his son and lawyer. Luke announced that the entire conversation would be recorded. Then, he began to ask about the details of the case. Thanks to the lawyer's prompting, Jamie calmed down and answered that he wasn't comfortable answering both related questions, but Luke Luke seemed to have anticipated that, so he said he had seen Jamie's school report card. Jamie had excellent grades in all subjects. Luke asked if he was planning to go to university. He hesitated, looking at his father. Jamie said he wasn't sure. Luke continued that the school report stated that Jamie's behavior had started to become problematic since last year, but Jamie answered vaguely. At this point, Luke asked if he had any close friends. He nodded in confirmation. Luke asked who they were, but Jamie said he wasn't comfortable saying. Luke said he wouldn't get them into trouble, but Jamie said Luke had just broken down his door, so his words didn't sound trustworthy. Jamie's answer stunned everyone. Clearly, this boy's intelligence far surpassed his peers. Luke pulled out some photos of models from the file. The photos showed girls dressed provocatively. All of these were pictures Jamie had reposted on Instagram, especially the most recent one. Below the photo were a series of suggestive and offensive comments, all written by Jamie himself. So Luke asked Jamie what he thought of women and if he liked girls. After receiving an affirmative answer, he showed him a picture. In the picture was Jamie with another boy. At first, Jamie didn't want to reveal the identities of the other two. At this point, the female officer said that even if he didn't say, the police would find out anyway, so the boy revealed them. But when Luke asked if Jamie had gone out with friends last night, he once again used the phrase, "I'm not comfortable saying," to evade the question. The gentle questioning tactic didn't seem to work. Luke didn't beat around the bush anymore and asked what he was wearing last night. Jamie replied that he didn't remember. Luke said the police couldn't find the clothes he was wearing last night at home, but they did find the shoes he was wearing. Jamie argued that the photo was too blurry to see clearly. Luke asked if he had a pair of blue and white Nike sneakers. He confirmed it. At this point, the female officer asked if he knew a girl named Katie. Jamie didn't deny it. But when asked if they were friends, Jamie said they were just acquaintances from school, not close friends. The officer countered that Katie frequently commented on his Instagram. It didn't look like they were just acquaintances. Jamie then asked if the deceased was her. They believed he knew that very well, so his question was just a clever little trick. Luke didn't want the conversation to drag on. Then the officer asked if they had ever been intimate. Eddie reminded him that Jamie was only 13, so that question was too sensitive, but the officer said she was just following procedure. At this point, Jamie replied no. The police began providing information about the case. Katie left home at 8:30 p.m. last night. Her body was found at 10:30 p.m. in the parking lot. Paramedics tried to stop the bleeding, but were unsuccessful. Forensic experts determined the time of death to be between 9:30 and 10:30 p.m. Luke asked Jamie where he was during that time, but he just said he didn't remember. Clearly, he was starting to lose his mind. Even if he said he couldn't say, it would be perfectly understandable. Seeing no progress, Luke took the opportunity to question Eddie. Eddie said he worked overtime at the company last night and only got home early this morning when the police broke down the door. Barlow immediately reminded Eddie that he wasn't a subject of questioning at this session. The female officer then shifted the questioning to Jamie. She said the victim had been stabbed 7 times. The stab wounds were scattered all over her body, her tail, arms, chest, and even her neck. That's why paramedics were completely unable to stop the bleeding. Jamie said nothing. He just silently bowed his head. The girl in the photo, a bright life, passed away quietly last night. At this point, Luke played his final card. He asked Jamie if he knew that cameras were installed all over the streets. Barlow noticed Jamie's unusual behavior and suggested they pause to talk privately. But Eddie, who believed in the truth, didn't want to stop. He hoped to clarify everything so his son could be vindicated. So Barlow didn't object. Luke explained that the police had collected camera footage from public systems and shops around the area. They had reconstructed Jamie and Katie's entire journey last night. He then showed a photo of Jamie and his 2 friends. The photo was taken at 7:43 p.m. last night. Jamie was wearing a sweater, jeans, and the sneakers mentioned earlier. An hour later, Jamie left alone. After that, his journey continuously appeared in the video footage. Then Katie appeared in the frame. The camera footage showed Jamie following her the entire way. Luke held up the photos and asked why he was following Katie. At this point, any explanation seemed meaningless. Seeing that the time was right, Luke advised Jamie not to continue avoiding the issue. Even if he didn't speak now, he would eventually have to admit it. But Jamie still maintained that he had done nothing wrong. Luke stopped arguing and took out a laptop. He showed a video recording of Jamie and Katie in the parking lot. The footage was from the crime scene. The time displayed was 10:30 p.m., perfectly matching the time of the murder. In the video, the two argued. Katie pushed Jamie away and then angrily left. He immediately stood up and stabbed her in the stomach. She collapsed, but was still alive. He didn't stop but continued to stab her multiple times with the cold knife. The camera didn't capture any sound from the scene. The interrogation room was also completely silent. Eddie had just moments ago placed so much trust in his son, but now all he could do was watch him go. He couldn't believe his son was a murderer, but faced with the undeniable evidence from the video, video, he couldn't refute it. That moment also meant both families were shattered. Jamie said nothing, only bowed his head and wept. Luke didn't understand why Jamie's journey home wasn't recorded, but what was certain was that he avoided the cameras and destroyed the clothes. He only brought home the shoes because they were a limited edition. The police found bloodstains on them. Luke could only sigh helplessly and wonder what all this was for. Didn't Jamie intend to apologize to the victim's parents? Jamie didn't answer Luke's agonizing question. He only sobbed uncontrollably, as if he were the victim in this case. Soon after, everyone left the interrogation room. Only the father and son remained in the empty room. Eddie didn't know how to begin the conversation. Just half an hour earlier, his son had insisted that the boy was innocent. He had chosen to place his absolute trust in his son. Now that the truth was so clear, was there any hope of turning things around? All the evidence pointed to Jamie, who vehemently denied it. Yet two major questions remained. First, where was the murder weapon? Second, why would Jamie kill a classmate he wasn't even close to? Luke decided to investigate the truth himself. He went to Jamie's school to gather information. First, he sought out the victim's best friend. Luke politely thanked her for taking the time to talk, but her response was unexpected. Her frustrated reply clearly showed her attitude. Her best friend had been unjustly murdered, and the police had enough evidence, yet couldn't convict the suspect. All of this left her on the verge of collapse. Then, the female officer asked about the relationship between Jamie and Katie. The girl said Katie wouldn't actively approach someone like Jamie, but the female officer pointed out that they frequently interacted on Instagram. The girl felt that this was tantamount to blaming the victim, suggesting the police were using a vague relationship to convict the case. She angrily questioned why they were asking such pointless questions when they already had evidence. The conversation ended in tension and dissatisfaction. Afterward, the two followed the principal to Jamie's classroom. They announced that a serious murder had just occurred, but the murder weapon had not yet been found. Anyone with any clues that could assist the investigation should contact the police immediately. At that moment, the homeroom teacher slowly walked in, appearing indifferent, as if it had nothing to do with her. Luke handed her his business card and told her to call the number on it if she needed anything. Then, they left the classroom. In the hallway, they both took a deep breath. That's when Luke began to recount the case. Although the police had a lot of evidence, Jamie still had a chance to deny guilt if the murder weapon wasn't found. The video from that night confirmed he had passed by the school. More worryingly, the motive for the crime remained undetermined. At this point, the principal came out and the three of them headed towards Katie's old classroom. After a few questions with the homeroom teacher, the teacher introduced the two police officers to the class. Coincidentally, Luke's son was also in this class. Adam was being bullied and isolated, but Luke didn't seem bothered. He began explaining his reason for attending. However, the fire alarm went off, forcing him to instruct the teacher in charge to evacuate the students. The students quickly rushed out onto the schoolyard. It seemed they had rehearsed such situations many times before. At that moment, Katie's best friend arrived on the schoolyard. She saw Ryan, Jamie's friend, not far ahead. Immediately, she pushed through the crowd and approached him. Using her superior physique, she repeatedly kicked him until he fell to the ground. She shouted that they had killed Katie. The students watching pulled out their phones to record the scene. Teachers noticed what was happening and quickly rushed over. One teacher grabbed the aggressive girl and pulled her away from the crowd. Another teacher helped Ryan to the infirmary. This unexpected situation caught Luke's attention. Katie's friend venting her anger on Ryan clearly indicated there was something fishy going on. Afterward, the two went to the school infirmary. Despite his previous failed interrogation, Luke decided to start a gentle conversation with Ryan. He recounted some childhood stories, including a fight that resulted in him losing a tooth. Such childhoods are often filled with such memories. Ryan sensed that Luke must have been a prominent figure at school. Luke immediately began recounting his glorious past. Then, he skillfully steered the conversation back to the case. The last time Luke went to see Ryan, Tommy said they had also met with him, but his father didn't allow him to say much. Before going to school today, the police had questioned Tommy and Ryan, but hadn't obtained any useful information. However, Ryan's deliberate avoidance of the question suggested he was hiding something. After a while, Luke brought the conversation back to the case. He wanted to know Jamie's motive for the murder. In the video from that night, all three of them appeared, so Ryan must have understood Jamie's state of mind at that time. But Ryan said nothing unusual happened that day. They were just the three of them, taking a walk as usual. At this point, Luke asked about the relationship between Jamie and the victim. Ryan replied that he didn't know her at all. After saying that, he stood up, preparing to leave. Luke said they still hadn't found the knife Jamie used. Ryan made an excuse to leave. His clumsy acting and deliberate evasiveness didn't help him escape suspicion. Conversely, this only made Luke more suspicious of Ryan. After the fire alarm was lifted, they returned to the victim's classroom. Luke reminded the students that if they had any information, they must report it to the police. police. Just then, Adam unexpectedly appeared at the classroom door. Luke wondered why he wasn't going into the classroom. He said he wanted to talk to Luke privately. Then the two went to an empty classroom. Luke thought his son would tell him about being bullied at school, but instead, he said he had information related to the case. Luke anxiously asked if Adam knew where the murder weapon was, or if anyone had revealed any secrets to him. But Adam's words were like a cold shower for Luke. Adam said Luke couldn't investigate because he didn't understand anything. Luke couldn't understand their coded language, so how could he know what was going on? Adam went on to say that from beginning to end, Luke had never understood the world of young people. The more Luke listened, the more confused he became. Adam explained that when the police looked at Instagram, they didn't understand the hidden meanings. Young people have their own code language. In school, there's a popular rule called 80 out of 20, meaning 80 girls are only attracted to the 20 most outstanding boys. Katie's comment about the bomb emoji was meant to mock Jamie and call him a single person. Luke immediately asked, "Who isn't single at 13? Katie meant Jamie would be lonely forever. Adam explained that labeling someone means they'll die alone, lonely for life. Those who liked the post agreed with that statement. Luke felt Adam's explanation was a bit forced. Seeing Luke's disbelief, Adam got up and left. Luke followed Adam and said what he had just heard was very helpful, but drawing conclusions based solely on one emoji wasn't convincing enough. Adam continued to explain that young people have their own interpretations of symbols. For example, a heart emoji with different colors means each color has a different meaning. Once young people recognize those symbols, they carry the weight of real words. It means Katie was the ringleader in insulting Jamie with that sticker. She bullied Jamie. Adam said all he knew was from what he saw on social media. He wasn't sure what actually happened. At this point, Luke said he couldn't reveal too much about the case. Adam laughed, saying the information about the case had already spread everywhere. Their conversation clearly showed a significant gap between them, but generational differences seemed to always be an insurmountable obstacle for adults. Shortly after, Luke left the classroom. Although the murder weapon hadn't been found, he had at least determined Jamie's motive. No one expected such a quick turn of events. They thought Jamie was the villain, but it turned out he was also a victim. After saying goodbye to the teachers, the two went outside, and Luke told his colleague his assessment. He was sure Ryan was hiding something. Shortly afterward, the two returned to the classroom. Unexpectedly, Ryan had secretly climbed out the door and escaped. Luke didn't think twice before immediately chasing after Ryan. This strange behavior only reinforced his suspicions. The two chased each other across the school grounds, speeding along the road. Ryan recklessly crossed the busy traffic, and Luke followed without hesitation. Ryan, in a panic, ran into a dead-end alley. Luke pulled Ryan aside and asked if Katie had ever verbally bullied Jamie before. Ryan retorted, "Why don't you ask Tommy?" Luke knew Ryan was deliberately avoiding the issue. He angrily asked if the knife belonged to Ruin, but Ryan continued to deny it. Luke's anger flared up. At this point, the truth was finally revealed. If Ryan hadn't been involved, perhaps the tragedy wouldn't have happened. However, that didn't matter anymore. A series of legal interrogations awaited him. There was no doubt he was an accomplice in the murder. Luke instructed the female police officer that once the murder weapon was found, they should formally file a case against Jamie. Then, he said he had a personal matter to attend to. After saying this, he left the scene. Shortly afterward, he met Adam at the school gate. What happened today made him realize he was a failed father. Not only had he lacked proper care for his son, but he also knew nothing about his son's life. But from this moment on, he would change completely. The teenage murder case was finally closed. As an investigator, Luke had done an excellent job. But was it really over? Actually, not yet. 13-year-old Jamie was accused of murdering his classmate Katie. But as the investigation deepened, the investigators discovered a deeper motive behind the murder. Before Katie's death, she had led a group of friends in verbally bullying Jamie. She mocked him, calling him a lonely failure who would live to old age. Out of anger, Jamie brutally murdered Katie. 6 months have passed since the incident, and Jamie is still being held at a correctional facility awaiting trial. Psychologist Briani arrives at the monitoring room. She wants to review the video of Jamie's altercation with someone a few days ago. The manager asks if this will help with the psychological report. He's clearly annoyed with her, but due to her insistence, he reluctantly plays the recording. The boy in the video is about Jamie's age. The two are locked in a fierce struggle, neither willing to give way. At this point, the manager mentions that this is Briani's 5th visit. He then sarcastically remarks that previous experts only needed 3 meetings to complete a psychological assessment. She counters that accuracy is important, not speed. He is speechless. Shortly afterward, Briani enters the chat room, thoughtfully preparing milk tea and a sandwich for Jamie. He looked much better than before. At first, they chatted about light topics, laughing heartily like old friends reuniting. Then she asked him what he thought of his father and grandfather. Jamie replied somewhat dismissively that they were both men. Briani suggested they could be called men males. To her, men were usually people who knew how to use tools, were good at repairs, liked sports, and frequented bars. Then she asked if Jamie's father liked to drink, but he said his father rarely went to bars, even less than his grandfather. At this point, she asked about his grandfather's recent situation. He said his grandfather hadn't visited him much lately. They used to go on vacations together on the island. He seemed very happy when recalling those memories. Immediately afterward, she brought up the word male again, but before she could say anything more, he interrupted her. He realized that from the moment she entered, she had become evasive, no longer as straightforward as their first conversation. It felt like she was trying to get information out of him. She was slightly surprised by what she'd said earlier. Jamie had said he regretted that his father had treated him so well, and that she shouldn't ask any more questions about his father. It wouldn't make any sense. Bryony said she wasn't trying to get information out of him, although Jamie's words were partly true, but a calm and guided approach was necessary. If he asked too directly, the answers would only be embellished, and then this psychological assessment would be worthless for the trial. Soon, Jamie calmed down. He suddenly asked her if he was angry. When she denied it, he made a request to see her notes. He wanted to know how she assessed him, but she said she definitely couldn't show them to him. Jamie didn't expect Bryony to ask the lawyer for confirmation. He had underestimated her sense of responsibility in her work. Then she explained that even though she was hired by Jamie's parents, it didn't mean she worked for them. The judge would rely on the assessment report to understand the defendant, so her report had to be fair and objective. At this point, Jamie raised his hand, pretending to be tired. Bryony asked if he felt bored. He replied no. However, he couldn't hide the boredom clearly visible on his face. Then she continued to ask questions. She wanted to know how he felt about becoming a man. At this point, Bryony began to explain that she had asked about Jamie's feelings towards his father and grandfather to find an answer from that perspective, not to directly ask him about his feelings as a man. So she wasn't trying to pry, but rather communicating in a way that he could understand better. After saying that, Bryony asked if she could talk about Jamie's father. He didn't answer. Instead, he mentioned that he wanted to see her report. This showed Jamie understood the importance of this assessment, but Bryony still refused. Seeing that he couldn't change her mind, he started talking about his father. Eddie worked as a plumber, fixing toilets. He was often out from early morning until late at night doing extra work, so he didn't pay much attention to Jamie most of the time. When it came to Eddie's temper, Jamie said his father was hot-tempered but had never hit him. The worst he'd ever done was smash the car roof. Bryony asked what he usually did in his free time. He didn't understand why she was beating around the bush just to talk about his father. Clearly, he was still wary of Bryony and couldn't understand the purpose of today's conversation. Bryony replied that she just wanted to know what kind of person Jamie saw his father as, because Eddie was the most important person in his life. At this point, Bryony asked what Eddie usually did in his free time. Jamie said Eddie often took him to play sports, but he wasn't very good at them. Every time they practiced, Eddie would cheer him on from the stands, but whenever he made a mistake, Eddie would turn away. Jamie thought it was because Eddie didn't want to show his disappointment. Bryony tried to comfort him, saying she wasn't good at sports either, but Jamie didn't respond. He felt he'd already answered enough, and now he wanted to talk about what really mattered to him. He asked if she could help him get out of here. Bryony replied that she had no right to do so. Jamie immediately became angry and questioned why they weren't keeping him in a regular detention center, but instead making him suffer in a place like this. Bryony explained that all minors awaiting trial were kept here. Jamie complained that nobody here was normal. Everyone was constantly screaming like they had mental illnesses. The more he talked, the angrier he got, jumping up from his chair. He asked why Ryan was allowed to stay at home awaiting trial. Bryony replied that the charges against Ryan weren't serious. Jamie countered that being accused didn't mean being convicted. Why was he being treated so unfairly? He wasn't even the murderer, yet now he was living in hell. He angrily chased her away. She held him down in his chair, unable to speak. Jamie was completely different from his usual calm demeanor. Then the security guard asked if they should stop the conversation. Bryony signaled they shouldn't. They took a break and would continue. Bryony walked out into the hallway. Clearly, this conversation had gone far beyond her expectations. Jamie's previous pleasant attitude was all a facade. This showed that her gentle approach had failed. His anger was either out of control or a desperate attempt to regain the upper hand. To verify her hypothesis, Bryony returned to the monitoring room. She watched Jamie intently on the screen. Now she was considering whether to continue the conversation, and if so, what would be the most effective way to approach Jamie. She stood silently for a long time. After regaining her composure, she returned to the conversation room. Her attitude completely changed. She pulled up a chair and sat down right in front of Jamie. She said she had no connection to the police and that she wasn't there to force him to confess. She just needed to know a few things to understand how Jamie viewed certain issues. At this point, their conversation had become a battle of wits. Jamie's attitude also changed. He calmly said he would answer the questions seriously. She returned to the topic of men. Through their conversation, she learned that although Jamie's father was hot-tempered, he had never laid a hand on his wife. And besides his wife, he hadn't been with any other women. Jamie then asked why she kept bringing up his father. What he didn't know was that in psychology, the father is the first role model a son observes for how a man behaves. The fact that his father had no female friends also showed that Jamie lacked education regarding women. This led to him having no communication skills with women. That's why things escalated so badly that night. Ultimately, it led to an irreversible tragedy. The more they talked, the more Brianni's suspicions were confirmed. Jamie not only didn't have a girlfriend, but he didn't have any female friends either. Then she asked him what he thought a romantic relationship at this age would develop to. He hesitantly asked if he needed to answer that question. She nodded in confirmation, saying it could be touching, kissing, for example. Touching, what did that mean? Touching certain parts of her body. Brianni wasn't surprised by that. At this point, Jamie began to open up unconsciously. He said he had seen nude photos of 2 female classmates. Brianni asked if he thought she would be happy if she knew he saw them. He said other people saw them too. Brianni asked if Katie was among them. Jamie was speechless. He quickly asked how she guessed that. She said it wasn't important. She wanted to know Jamie's feelings when he saw the photos. At this point, she had completely taken control of the conversation. She repeated the question, "How do you feel when you see nude photos of other people, especially when it's a photo of someone you know?" He said it was hard to say. "I quite like it. It feels like I'm in control." She asked if it made him feel like he was controlling others. When Brianni mentioned the feeling of control, it meant she saw through Jamie. Throughout the conversation, he had always tried to take the initiative. Only when he knew he couldn't overpower her did he answer the question. Later, from Jamie's account, many students in the school had seen the photo. Katie had proactively sent it to David. Then, David continued to spread it. After that, Jamie indifferently said that probably no one else would send him photos anymore. Brianni replied that it was true, because Katie had already gotten her. Jamie said, "It's not that you didn't mention her. I was talking about the other girls." After this, no one will dare send photos like that anymore because it spreads so widely, you idiot. Brianni asked him if he should collect more pictures of girls and share them with other boys. He said such illogical things that he couldn't even distinguish right from wrong. Looking at it that way, murder wouldn't be surprising to him. Brianni asked why he used that tone when saying she was dead. Brianni's answer wasn't really what she thought. Brianni mentioned Katie's character to try and stir Jamie's conscience, hoping to awaken him, but Jamie only found Brianni's tone strange, not remorseful at all. He was silent for a long time. Then she asked if girls liked him. He said they didn't like him, obviously. She asked why he said it was obvious. He said, "Because I'm ugly." She asked what he thought of that. He said she should have said he wasn't ugly. At this point, Jamie realized he couldn't manipulate Brianni or use tricks to win her over. This meant her report could be detrimental to him. A surge of inexplicable anger welled up inside him. Losing his composure, Jamie blurted out his true thoughts. The psychologist wasn't as troublesome as she was. That person was much easier to deal with. Then Jamie moved closer to Brianni with a threatening, superior air. At this moment, the person facing Brianni was no longer an innocent teenager, but someone who had ruthlessly stabbed their victim. Brianni tried her best to hide her fear, because any hint of it would allow Jamie to exploit that weakness. After a while, having calmed down, Jamie returned to his seat at the table. He tentatively asked if she wanted to leave. Brianni simply replied that it was entirely up to Jamie, but he said nothing more. Their conversation continued. From that, Brianni learned that Jamie, Tommy, and Ryan were frequently bullied. Their classmates not only spat at them, but even deliberately pushed them down. When the nickname "Stupid Pig" that their classmates gave Ryan came up, Jamie felt it was quite fitting. In his eyes, Ryan was also incredibly stupid. Clearly, even though all 3 of them were ostracized, Jamie always considered him superior to the other 2. Then Brianni took out a picture from her bag. It was Katie's comment on Jamie's Instagram, but Brianni accidentally misspelled Instagram as Facebook. This small mistake caught Jamie's attention. He asked if she was okay, saying she looked a little hot. He asked if his shouting had scared her. Katie had commented on Instagram. Jamie said he was only 13, so he didn't look that scary, right? But no matter what he said, she didn't react. Seeing that his provocations weren't working, he continued the conversation. He explained that the red pill symbol represented the 80-20 principle, and the P symbol represented the school of truth, a group of men who believed they didn't need women. All these symbols implicitly suggested Jamie was a failure. Brianni asked if he'd ever thought about telling anyone else, but Jamie insisted he wasn't the murderer. He could have killed her, but he didn't. He coldly recounted the whole story. After the nude photos were leaked, Jamie had gone to see Katie and tried to comfort her. He then asked if she wanted to go out with him, thinking she was vulnerable and he could take advantage of the situation. But her response was different from what he expected. She just gave a weak smile and said she wasn't that pathetic. Then she left a series of emojis. At this point, the truth finally came to light. Jamie's claim that Katie verbally bullied him was entirely his own doing. Yet even now, he doesn't acknowledge his fault. He even asks Briony if she thinks Katie is the flirtatious type. Briony sits silently in her chair, saying nothing. She has finally ended this long, intense game. After days of patiently unraveling the layers of the story, she has finally arrived at the truth. The transformation from a boy into a devil is enough to take her time to process. At this point, Jamie realizes he shouldn't have revealed the truth. He hastily says, "I was just talking nonsense." But no matter what he says, it's too late. Driven by her professional ethics, Briony wants to give him one last chance. She asks if he understands that Katie's death means she's gone from this world, that the person who killed her has also ruined her future. But Jamie evades the question, saying he didn't kill anyone. Furthermore, Katie was indeed flirtatious. At this point, Briony had lost all hope. She said this would be the last time they would see each other. Jamie was horrified. He realized he had ruined the conversation. The fear on his face wasn't remorse, but fear of going to jail. No matter how much Jamie pleaded, Briony called the police. Jamie was dragged out of the room amidst desperate screams. Only when Jamie was out of sight did Briony drop her tough facade and burst into tears. It's hard to imagine how difficult the past 60 minutes had been for her. The person she had faced was no longer a 13-year-old child, but a cold-blooded killer who couldn't distinguish right from wrong. Even more terrifying was that Jamie wasn't an isolated case among British teenagers. After this, what would become of his life? A 17-year-old boy named Jamie had stabbed his victim 7 times. Despite clear video evidence, he still refused to confess. He even frightened the psychologist to the point of tears. So what kind of family was behind that boy? The crime happened a year ago. Jamie is due to go to court in 4 weeks. Today is Eddie's 50th birthday. Surprisingly, he received a birthday card from his son, but he showed no joy. The card reminded Eddie that he had a son who had committed murder. At that moment, Lisa rushed into the kitchen, saying that the truck parked outside had broken down. The whole family ran outside, and on the truck was a misspelled word, perverted. Just looking at the spelling mistake, you could tell it was a cruel prank by some kids. A peaceful day was shattered like that. Manda suggested the family should move out of town, because such pranks were just the beginning, and no one knew what else might happen in the future. But Eddie was furious. He believed that running away wasn't the solution. His daughter was still in school, and they hadn't done anything wrong. Then, Eddie went outside and tried his best to wipe away the graffiti from the car, but his efforts were in vain. Eddie couldn't remove the paint, just as time couldn't erase the stain his son had caused. A group of young men on bicycles mocked him. They seemed to be the ones who vandalized the car, but he couldn't do anything about it. Jamie hadn't just ruined a family, he had plunged his own family into darkness. A rash and foolish act had caused those who loved him to suffer. Eddie asked his wife and daughter to go buy some paint. He begged them to help him out one last time to salvage what had been a wonderful holiday. His wife's words reminded him it was his birthday. He shouldn't spread negative emotions to his family. Then the whole family got in the car and went to the supermarket. The tension finally subsided. Eddie told Lisa to put on some music. After dealing with the paint on the car, the family would go hiking or watch a movie together. At this point, Manda suggested Lisa play Take On Me. This was her favorite song from her younger days. As the cheerful melody played, the two suddenly remembered their early romance. Back then, Eddie was very lively and energetic. Their first date was at a school dance. The kids were all very shy. Eddie was the first to step onto the dance floor with exaggerated moves. Manda laughed happily at this. Even without the internet, everyone's childhood was carefree and full of laughter. The two of them hummed along to the music as if nothing had ever happened. How wonderful it would be if things had truly been like that. All 3 of them in the car avoided mentioning Jamie's story, but each word seemed to silently ask Jamie, "Why did you kill someone?" But they would never have an answer. Soon they arrived at the supermarket. Eddie went to the household goods section to ask the employee how to remove paint, but the employee pulled him aside and said he recognized him as Jamie's father. The employee whispered that he believed Jamie wasn't the murderer. However, Eddie seemed annoyed, showing he didn't want to talk about it anymore. His son's story was always on his mind, and he couldn't avoid it no matter what. Soon after, the boy got him a can of paint from the shelf. When Eddie left the store, he spotted the pranksters from that morning. They were still following him. Eddie immediately rushed out, quickly climbing over the fence. The boy on the lawn hadn't even managed to escape when Eddie grabbed him by the neck and pulled him up. Eddie warned the boy never to come near his family again, or he would teach them a lesson they'd never forget. After saying that, he let the boy go. After all, he couldn't be too harsh with a minor. At this moment, Eddie's spirits hit rock bottom. Despite his wife's pleas, he poured paint on the car. He only wanted his family to live in peace. But for all these years, his wish had remained unfulfilled. On the way home, no one spoke. Everyone seemed to understand each other implicitly. Suddenly, Jamie called to ask Eddie how his birthday had been. Eddie tried to remain calm, saying everything was fine, they were going to see a movie and have dinner together. At this point, Jamie said that after careful consideration, he had decided to plead guilty before the trial. Eddie remained silent. What he hoped for most was that his son would repent. But even after seeing the video, he still clung to a glimmer of hope. Jamie's words completely extinguished that hope. When they arrived home, Manda, who had been holding back her tears for so long, burst into tears, almost going crazy. Then she wiped away her tears and went into the bedroom. Eddie was already wearing the shirt his wife had bought him for the movie. Then his wife came to his bedside to comfort him. Jamie's guilty plea was probably the best option. Eddie said that at first he refused to believe it until he saw the video with his own eyes. His wife said they had known each other since they were young, so now they had to get through this together. She began recounting old stories about their son. After school, Jamie would lock himself in his room. Even at 1 or 2 in the morning, the lights would still be on. Every time she knocked on the door to remind him to go to bed early, he would just turn off the lights without saying anything. Eddie sighed, saying, "That's how all kids are these days. Who knows what they're watching in their rooms? No one can protect their child all day long." Once, he just wanted to find a way to exercise, but his phone played inappropriate videos. At this point, his wife said that at least Jamie's temper was exactly like Eddie's, but Eddie argued that it had nothing to do with him. Manda thought they should have intervened earlier. She believed that children's mistakes were, to some extent, related to their parents. That's an undeniable truth, but sometimes parents can't foresee the consequences of their choices. Eddie recalled how as a child, every time he misbehaved, his father would beat him. He vowed that he would never do that to his own children, and he did, but the outcome was completely the opposite. He had taken Jamie to soccer lessons to improve his health, but the boy's performance was terrible. Eddie stood outside the field, lacking the courage to face his own son. He didn't realize that every boy sees his father as an ideal role model, yearning for his father's approval. After realizing he wasn't suited for sports, Jamie started drawing. Then he asked for a computer. From then on, he often locked himself in his room, trying to be a good son in the way he understood it. But who could have imagined things would lead to such tragedy? Then Manda comforted Eddie, telling him they had to try to accept the truth. At that moment, Lisa, dressed in a beautiful new outfit, walked in. Afterward, Eddie apologized to his daughter and said that he shouldn't have lost his temper with the other 2 children. But the little girl said she understood her father's feelings. Then she told him not to move. Moving to another place might bring some peace for a while, but sooner or later, the new neighbors would find out. Then the problem would be amplified. In the end, it would only get worse. Besides, it was Jamie, their relative. Then Manda said she would cancel their movie date. Lisa suggested renting a movie to watch at home. Manda said she would go down to the kitchen to prepare breakfast first. The whole family agreed and went outside. It was still the same lawn. Flowers might grow there, or poppies might grow there. There are things that no one knows why they happen. Seeing his wife and daughter leave, Eddie quietly opened his son's bedroom door. Looking at the room before him, still exactly as it was before, he couldn't hold back the tears welling up in his eyes. The image of his innocent, lovable son as a child felt like it was just yesterday. Yet, the very boy who was so terrified he wet his pants at the sight of the police ended up stabbing the victim 7 times. What Jamie didn't know was that he not only killed Katie, but also took the lives of his parents for the rest of their lives. The film ends here. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and see you again.